Big good one here, and eventually we will like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Anything you can do to help promote and rank up my channel, absolutely appreciate it. Don't forget to comment in the comment section below or reply to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this one. Now, Dragon's Dogma, that's what I'm reviewing, a Netflix original series. Dragon's Dogma, an anime based off a popular video game series of the same name. Now, I'm only familiar with Dragon's Dogma 2, Dark Arisen, a game that I was incredibly immersed in, engaged in, full of rich lore, creatures, characters, a dark fantasy that is just really amazing to experience. And so let's just jump right into the best stuff. So this game does a good job. I mean, this show does a good job of capturing the tone and feel of the game, as well as the creatures, the lore, all that rich stuff, and transferring it there to screen. This is one of the better adaptations. It has this really engaging, interesting 3D, 2D style of animation that just makes everything pop. And the action in here, the creatures, and the action, it just gives everything this glossy, hyper engaging finish that is just really different from anything I've experienced when it comes to watching. And if you're not, spoiler warning, if you don't know what Dragon's Dogma is really about, you have this player character called the Arisen, in this case our main protagonist, and it's a character who gets their heart plucked out by a dragon and becomes somewhat more than human. And they get this pawn assigned to them, which is kind of this sidekick character. And I really enjoy the way that the series does actually capture some of those elements from the game, such as like the main protagonist naming the pawn, because pawns don't really have a name. So it's really engaging in a lot of different ways, and it really captures the creatures so well as we go into this kind of this kind of episodic monster of the week type deal. Each episode they're facing a different creature from the games, while also handling in their own way. They do a really good job of making this their own by sort of conveying this human condition of the week too, along with the monster of the week. They give you some of the darker elements of humanity and all that. They kind of a 7 deadly sins, while also giving us a monster in a challenge for the Arisen to encounter along their journey. And all this stuff really comes across very, very well. I have no real problem with the voice acting. I think it's exceptionally well. I think the animation is quite interesting and quite different, and the execution of everything, most of it goes over extraordinarily well, and it has its kind of own stamp on all of this, while remaining true to the game. They do their own thing. But for anybody that's played the game, the environments, the creatures, the inside decor of certain buildings and stuff that they go into, it really reflects the stuff from the game very, very well. With that said, there's really not a lot of negatives. I went in this, I had my guard up. But let's go on into the personal bias section of my review. So if you're not familiar with my channel, I give you the best stuff up front in Act 1, and then in Act 2, I give you a personal bias if I have any. In Act 3, I give you the worst stuff about it. So Act 2, my personal bias is, as someone who is familiar with the game, who enjoys the game, I'm probably more invested in this, and probably more interested in this, and probably more willing to overlook any flaws that it may have had. Other than that, though, If you're not familiar with this, I highly recommend you play one of the games before you jump right in this. I only played Dragon's Dogma 2, Dark Arisen. Very great game. It's a dark fantasy RPG. And for anybody into that kind of stuff, highly recommended. Highly recommended. With that, but other than that, I can't say that I would have a high interest in watching something like this if I had not been familiar with the game. So let's move into the worst stuff about this. The same 2D, 3D style of animation that really makes it pop also kind of there are some moments that look a little bit off or strange, particularly early into like the first episode when Ethan's walking. I just thought it looked a bit weird, but it becomes really interesting and highly engaging, especially when it comes to action. It has this level of intensity to it that reflects the hyper combat style of the game, and that's really the only negative I can say about it, other than where it ends is kind of a disappointment, but it does leave you craving more, and that's always what you want to do with your audience. So I'm looking forward to what season 2 will be, but from season 1 is season 1, in my opinion, and also due to the content of the show, it's going to come off as more of a standalone arc. Maybe each season will be a different main character or something to that effect. But this, I thought, was very well handled. This character going on this journey to get revenge on this dragon and having to encounter all these different creatures of the week along the way. Also, while fleshing out the character, they did a great job of fleshing out our main character and and showing all the stuff, not all the stuff from the games, but exploring a lot of the lore and creatures and history there and the way pawns are. I just thought it was very well done overall, and the animated style of it is something that I'm not all that familiar with, that I think just made it that much more interesting. So with that said, I would actually rate this an 8 out of 10. I would have to say though, in the negative section, I wasn't prepared for the amount of sex and nudity they do have in here, and in some cases it just feels really unnecessary, and maybe altogether completely unnecessary. But it is anime, it's to be expected when you go into this kind of thing, and it is a very mature show, and it does really explore elements of the worst elements of the human condition very well. With that said, I'm greatly looking forward to a season 2 for this show. I highly recommend it. 8 out of 10, pretty damn solid, and I'm very curious to see if what the next protagonist will be, the next Arisen, and what creatures they're cover next, as well as if any of the characters from the games. Very curious. Big good one here. Leave your comments down below. What did you think of it? Have you seen it yet? Are you not familiar with Dragon's Dogma? Have you gone into this being, have you watched this show being unfamiliar with the game? Or are you very familiar with the game and for some reason didn't like the show? I'm very curious about everybody's different opinions on this one, how they take it, how they feel about it, what they thought the show did well, what they thought the show did poorly, and who was familiar with the game and who wasn't when they went into this, and who came out liking it, actually not being familiar with the game, or who came out liking it, being familiar with the game, or who came out liking it, wanting to take an interest in the game. I'm very curious to hear all that stuff, so comment down below. I'll reply to you as soon as possible. Big good one here. Consider subscribing. Smash that like if you agree with everything I've said here. And stay awesome. Rock on.